Marcus Chen adjusted the atmospheric recycler for the third time that morning, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency through the familiar routine. The Luna 7 research station had been his home for 8 years now, a self-imposed exile that began after the Terran Council's catastrophic decision regarding the Draconic Wars. 8 years of silence, save for the gentle hum of life support systems and the occasional crackle from his long-range scanner. The station perched on the rim of Shackleton Crater like a metallic spider, its solar arrays stretched wide to catch the pale sunlight that bathed the lunar surface. Marcus had chosen this location deliberately, far enough from Earth's major settlements to avoid unwanted visitors, yet close enough to monitor deep space communications. He told himself he was conducting legitimate research on cosmic radiation patterns, but the truth was simpler and more painful. He couldn't bear to look at what humanity had become. The morning alarm chimed softly, signaling another day in his carefully structured routine. Coffee first. Real Earth coffee. One of the few luxuries he allowed himself from the monthly supply drops. Then equipment checks, data analysis, and perhaps some work on his perpetually unfinished novel about better times. The routine kept him sane, kept the memories at bay. Marcus was reviewing solar panel efficiency reports when the long-range scanner erupted in a symphony of alerts. Multiple contacts, massive signatures, approaching fast from the outer system. His coffee mug hit the deck plating with a metallic clang as he lunged for the control console. "What the hell?" he muttered, fingers dancing across the holographic display. The scanner showed 10 distinct contacts, each one roughly the size of a small frigate. But the energy signatures were all wrong, organic, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded him uncomfortably of a heartbeat. As the contacts drew closer, the scanner's classification subroutines finally achieved a match. Dragons. 10 adult dragons, flying through the vacuum of space as if it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Marcus stared at the display for a long moment, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. During the war, he'd encountered dragons exactly twice. Once as an enemy combatant, once as reluctant allies against the Void spawn. Both times had left him with a profound respect for their intelligence and power, and an equally profound guilt over humanity's treatment of them. The lead dragon was massive, easily 200 meters from snout to tail, its scales gleaming like polished obsidian in the starlight. The others varied in size and coloration, deep blues, forest greens, one that seemed to shimmer with silver starlight. They moved with purpose, not the random wandering of lost creatures, but the determined flight of beings with a specific destination in mind, his station. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he opened the communication array. Standard first contact protocols demanded he announce himself, state his intentions, request theirs. But these weren't unknown aliens. These were dragons, beings whose language he'd studied extensively during his years as a xenolinguist for the Terran Defense Force. "This is Marcus Chen of Luna 7 Research Station," he broadcast on multiple frequencies, including the harmonic ranges dragons typically used. "I'm reading 10 contacts on approach vector. Please state your intentions." The response came not through his communication array, but directly into his mind, a sensation he remembered from his previous encounters with draconic telepathy. The mental voice was deep, resonant, tinged with exhaustion, and something that might have been hope. "Human Marcus Chen, I am Paraxis, elder of the Stellar Wind Clan. We seek sanctuary. We are pursued, and our young grow weak. Your station appeared on our sensors as we fled. Will you grant us haven?" The formal cadence of the mental communication couldn't hide the desperation underneath. Marcus closed his eyes, memories flooding back. The Terran Council's vote to declare all dragons enemy combatants, regardless of clan affiliation or individual actions. The systematic destruction of draconic settlements. the orbital bombardments that had turned 3 worlds into glass. Paraxis, this station has minimal life support. I can't accommodate 10 dragons of your size. A pause, then a different mental voice, younger, more urgent. Elder, the hunters draw close. We must make planetfall soon or risk the younglings. Marcus pulled up his station schematics, mind racing through possibilities. The main docking bay could theoretically hold 2, maybe 3 adult dragons if they coiled tightly. The cargo holds were pressurized but cramped. The external hull had anchor points where the dragons could secure themselves. But prolonged exposure to vacuum would be problematic even for their hardy physiology. How long do you need sanctuary? He asked. 3 days, perhaps 4. Long enough for our young to recover their strength and for the hunters to lose our trail. Marcus stared out the observation port at the approaching shapes, now visible as more than just scanner contacts. They flew in a protective formation, the larger dragons forming a perimeter around 3 smaller shapes that couldn't have been more than juveniles. One of the younglings was barely larger than a shuttle, its flight pattern wobbling with exhaustion. The smart thing would be to refuse. Earth Command would crucify him for harboring fugitive dragons, assuming they didn't simply destroy the station from orbit. His carefully maintained neutrality would be shattered. His peaceful exile would become a war zone. But as he watched the protective formation tighten around the struggling youngling, Marcus found himself thinking of other refugees, other desperate flights to sanctuary. His own species had a long history of turning away those who needed help most. Perhaps it was time for one human to choose differently. Paraxis, I'm transmitting docking procedures to your navigation mind. We'll make this work somehow. The relief in the elder dragon's mental voice was palpable. Human Marcus Chen, your kindness will be remembered. We offer the debt of sanctuary, a bond not lightly given. Marcus began emergency preparations, rerouting life support, clearing cargo holds, and activating emergency protocols he'd hoped never to use. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that these 4 days would change everything, not just for him, but possibly for the entire relationship between humans and dragons. The first dragon reached the station's docking array just as Marcus finished pressurizing the main cargo hold. Through the observation port, he watched Pyraxis maneuver his massive frame with impossible grace, settling into the bay with barely a meter of clearance on any side. The dragon's golden eyes met his through the transparent aluminum, and Marcus felt a moment of communication that transcended species, mutual recognition of a choice that would have consequences neither could fully foresee. The hunt for the dragons was about to become a test of one man's conscience against the machinery of interstellar politics. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus suspected he was going to discover that his 8 years of solitude had been preparation for exactly this moment. The next 18 hours tested every system on Lunar 7 beyond its design limits. Marcus had managed to accommodate 8 of the 10 dragons within the station's pressurized sections, while 2 of the larger adults, Paraxis and a deep blue dragon called Nethys, remained anchored to the external hull, their natural space adaptation keeping them comfortable in the vacuum. The 3 younglings had been given priority placement in the main living quarters, where Marcus could monitor their condition directly. The smallest, barely 12 meters long and shimmering with silver scales, had been in worse shape than anyone initially realized. Its name was Senna, and Marcus found himself checking on the young dragon every few hours, adjusting atmospheric composition and temperature to ease its recovery. Your species has an unusual talent for adaptation, Pyraxis observed during one of their mental conversations. The elder dragon's telepathic voice carried notes of amusement as he watched Marcus jury-rig a feeding system for the younglings. Most beings would have simply refused our request. Marcus paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead. The station's life support was running at 110% capacity, and the air had taken on a thick quality that made everything feel slightly surreal. Most humans probably would have, but I've seen what happens when we refuse to help those who need it. Through the station's hull, he felt rather than heard Pyraxis shift his massive weight. The Terran Council's decision regarding our people was unfortunate. But you were not part of that choice, were you, Marcus Chen? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus set down his tools and leaned against the bulkhead, suddenly feeling every one of his 47 years. I was part of it. Maybe not directly, but I was there. I was a xenolinguist with the Terran Defense Force when the vote came down. I could have spoken up, could have argued for a different path. Instead, I kept quiet and let others make the hard choices. And afterward? Marcus gestured around the cramped quarters, where dragons had coiled themselves into impossibly tight spirals to fit within spaces never designed for beings of their size. Afterward, I came here. Told myself I was conducting important research, but really I was just running away from what we'd become. A new mental voice joined the conversation. Senna, the injured youngling. Her telepathic communication was softer than the adults, tinged with the curiosity that seemed universal among young creatures. Why do your people fear us? We are not so different. The innocence in the question nearly broke Marcus's heart. He knelt beside the young dragon, noting that her color was improving as the specialized atmospheric mix took effect. Fear makes people do terrible things, little one. And sometimes when we've done terrible things, it's easier to keep doing them than to admit we were wrong. Senna's great golden eyes fixed on his face. But you are human, and you are not terrible. Before Marcus could respond, the station's proximity alarms erupted in a cascade of warnings. The main display lit up with multiple contacts approaching from the direction of Earth. 6 ships, military configuration, moving fast, and broadcasting Terran Defense Force identification codes. "Hunters!" Nethys hissed, her mental voice sharp with tension. "They have found us!" Marcus raced to the communication array, his mind calculating possibilities. The approaching ships were Talon-class destroyers, built specifically for hunting dragons during the war. Fast, heavily armed, and equipped with the latest tracking technology. They would have followed the dragon's ion trail through the outer system, and now they'd found Lunar 7. The lead ship opened communication on standard frequencies. The voice that emerged from the speakers was crisp, professional, and utterly without mercy. Lunar 7 Research Station. This is Captain Sarah Torres aboard the TDF Retribution. Our sensors indicate the presence of multiple draconic life forms at your location. Under Emergency Directive 847, you are ordered to stand down and prepare for immediate boarding. Marcus's hands hovered over the communication controls. Emergency Directive 847 was the legal framework that had enabled the systematic extermination of dragon settlements. It classified all dragons as enemy combatants and authorized their destruction on sight. If he acknowledged the dragon's presence, he'd be signing their death warrants. If he lied, he'd be betraying everything he'd tried to build here. TDF Retribution. This is Marcus Chen. I'm running a one-man research operation here. No unauthorized personnel aboard. A pause. Then Torres's voice returned, colder now. Dr. Chen, we're detecting massive biosignatures consistent with draconic life forms. Multiple contacts, including juveniles. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Around him, Marcus felt the mental stirring of the dragons as they prepared for what might be their final battle. Pyraxis's thoughts touched his mind, laden with ancient sadness. You have done enough, Marcus Chen. We will not allow your sacrifice to go unrewarded. Stand aside and let us face what comes. Like hell. Marcus's fingers flew across the console, activating systems he'd installed years ago but hoped never to use. Lunar 7 had been built on a decommissioned military platform. and some of its defensive capabilities remained functional. Not enough to fight 6 destroyers, but perhaps enough to buy time. TDF Retribution. You are approaching a designated research facility without proper authorization. I'm activating defensive protocols and requesting immediate communication with Sector Command. Dr. Chen, you are harboring enemy combatants. Stand down immediately or we will be forced to take action against your station. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of guilt and a lifetime of poor choices pressing down on him. When he opened them again, his voice was steady and clear. Captain Torres, there are no enemy combatants here. There are 10 dragons seeking sanctuary, including 3 children who are injured and exhausted. They pose no threat to anyone. I'm formally requesting political asylum for them under the Galactic Refugee Protection Accords. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. When Torres spoke again, her voice carried the flat tone of someone reciting regulations. The Galactic Refugee Protection Accords do not apply to designated enemy species. You have 30 seconds to surrender the dragons or we will take them by force. Around the station, Marcus felt the dragons stirring to movement. Even the injured younglings were attempting to rise, responding to some instinct that told them to face death on their wings, rather than cowering and hiding. The courage in their movements, dragons preparing to die rather than compromise their host's safety, finally broke something loose in Marcus's chest. Peraxis, can your people defend themselves if I give you maneuvering room? The elder dragon's mental voice carried grim satisfaction. Human Marcus Chen. We are the children of stars and vacuum. We have faced the destroyers before. But the cost will be high, and you will be caught in the crossfire. Marcus began powering up the station's emergency release systems, preparing to jettison the docking clamps and give the dragons space to fight. His hands moved with calm precision, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. TDF Retribution. This is Lunar 7. I formally deny your request for boarding. These dragons are under my protection, and this station is sovereign territory under Colonial Charter 445. You have no jurisdiction here. It was a legal fiction, but it might buy them a few more minutes. Through the observation ports, Marcus could see the destroyers settling into attack formation, their weapon arrays already charging for battle. What happened next would determine not just the fate of 10 dragons and 1 stubborn human, but possibly the future relationship between 2 species that had allowed fear and politics to drive them to the brink of mutual extinction. The first shots came without further warning, particle beams lancing across space to impact Luna 7's defensive screens. Marcus felt the station shudder as ancient deflector arrays absorbed energy they were never designed to handle. Emergency lights bathed everything in crimson, and the air filled with the acrid smell of overloaded circuits. All dragons, emergency release in 10 seconds. Marcus broadcast both verbally and telepathically, his mental voice somehow carrying despite his human limitations. Years of working with draconic communication had taught him to project thoughts with enough force to reach receptive minds. The station's docking clamps disengaged with a series of metallic clangs. And suddenly Luna 7 was surrounded by 10 dragons exploding outward like a living constellation. Even injured, they moved with a grace that made human spacecraft look like clumsy toys by comparison. Peraxis led the formation, his massive frame coiling through space as particle beams tracked his movement. The elder dragon's scales seemed to absorb and redirect the energy, creating a spectacular light show that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Behind him, the other adults formed a protective sphere around the 3 younglings, their combined presence creating a defensive pattern that confused the destroyer's targeting systems. Impressive. Captain Torres's voice came over the comm, clinical despite the chaos erupting around her ships. But ultimately futile. All ships implement dispersal pattern 7. Target the largest specimens first. Marcus watched the destroyers spread out, their formation designed to prevent the dragons from using their superior maneuverability to avoid crossfire. It was a sound, tactical decision, and under normal circumstances, it would have spelled doom for the refugee dragons. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Marcus Chen had spent 8 years preparing for a moment he'd hoped would never come. "Computer, implement Chen Protocol 7. He said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of straining hull plates. Hidden throughout Luna 7's structure, systems that had been dormant for nearly a decade suddenly roared to life. The station had been built on the framework of a decommissioned fortress platform, one of the massive defensive installations that had protected Earth during the early days of interstellar expansion. Marcus had spent years quietly restoring its weapon systems, telling himself it was merely an intellectual exercise. Now, as concealed gun ports opened and targeting arrays emerged from seemingly innocent research equipment, he realized he'd been preparing for exactly this confrontation. The first salvo from Luna 7 caught the destroyers completely off guard. Military doctrine assumed civilian research stations were helpless targets, not fortified positions capable of mounting serious resistance. 2 of the Talon-class ships took direct hits, their shields flaring and failing under the unexpected assault. "What the hell?" Torres's voice carried genuine surprise for the first time. "Chen, where did you get military-grade weaponry?" "Surplus sale," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across targeting controls. "Amazing what Earth Command throws away these days." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded military history. Dragons and human technology fought side by side against ships designed specifically to kill dragons, while a lone researcher-turned-soldier coordinated the defense of refugees he barely knew. Piraxis proved why dragons had been so feared during the war. The elder dragon moved through the destroyer formation like liquid lightning, his natural ability to navigate vacuum allowing him to perform maneuvers no mechanical ship could match. His breath weapon, a focused plasma stream that could cut through military-grade armor, disabled one destroyer's engines, sending it spinning helplessly away from the battle. The younger dragons followed his example, their smaller size allowing them to dart between enemy ships and strike at vulnerable systems. Even little Senna, despite her injuries, managed to disable a destroyer's sensor array with a precisely placed plasma burst. But the destroyers were adapting, their AI systems learning to predict draconic flight patterns. Marcus watched his sensors as the enemy ships began to anticipate dragon movements, their fire becoming more accurate with each passing minute. "Piraxis, they're learning your patterns," he warned through the telepathic link. "You need to change tactics." "Agreed, Marcus Chen. We will attempt the stellar wind maneuver, but we need you to provide covering fire for 30 seconds. Marcus didn't know what the stellar wind maneuver was, but the tone of Piraxis's mental voice suggested it was either brilliant or desperate, possibly both. "You've got it," he replied, pushing Luna 7's weapons to their absolute limit. Particle beams and plasma cannons fired in synchronized patterns, creating a wall of destructive energy that forced the destroyers to break off their attack runs. What followed took Marcus's breath away. The 10 dragons suddenly spread out in a complex 3-dimensional formation, their positions forming what looked like a mathematical equation written in living flesh. Then, as one, they began to sing. It wasn't audible sound. Dragons couldn't produce traditional music in the vacuum of space. Instead, it was a harmonic resonance transmitted through subspace, a frequency that seemed to touch something fundamental in the structure of local space-time. The effect on the destroyers was immediate and catastrophic. Their shields began to fluctuate wildly, as if the dragon song was somehow disrupting the coherence of their defensive fields. Weapon systems sparked and failed. Navigation computers crashed and rebooted in endless loops. "Impossible," Torres breathed, her voice filled with something that might have been awe. "How are they doing this?" Marcus found himself grinning despite the chaos around him. "Captain, you're witnessing something most humans have never seen. Dragons at their full potential. We've only ever fought them on our terms, in our space, using our rules. This is what they can do when they're free to be themselves." The stellar wind maneuver lasted exactly 93 seconds, and when it ended, 5 of the 6 destroyers were dead in space, their crews alive, but their ships completely disabled. Only Captain Torres's flagship remained functional, and that barely. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, the soft whisper of air recyclers, and the distant hum of cooling weapon systems. Around the station, 10 dragons hung motionless in space, their formation still holding despite their obvious exhaustion. "TDF retribution," Marcus said quietly into his communicator. "I believe we were discussing refugee status." A long pause, then Torres's voice returned, different now, respectful in a way it hadn't been before. "Dr. Chen, this changes things. I need to contact Sector Command." "You do that, Captain. In the meantime, my guests and I will be waiting right here." Over the next several hours, Marcus watched his communication array light up with traffic as word of the battle spread through military channels. Sector Command contacted Earth Command. Earth Command contacted the Colonial Council. The Colonial Council demanded explanations from everyone. Through it all, the dragons waited with infinite patience, occasionally sharing observations about human political structure that made Marcus laugh despite the tension. Senna, in particular, seemed fascinated by the complexity of human bureaucracy. "Your people create many rules," the young dragon observed, "but you also create many ways to ignore the rules." "It's a talent," Marcus admitted. "Sometimes it works in our favor." The resolution came from an unexpected source, not from military command or political leadership, but from public reaction. Someone, Marcus suspected a crew member from one of the disabled destroyers, had recorded the stellar wind maneuver and transmitted it to news networks throughout human space. Within hours, the footage was everywhere. Humans across dozens of worlds watched dragons perform something that was part warfare, part art, and part pure physics in ways their best scientists couldn't explain. The beauty of it, the impossible grace and power, sparked something in the human imagination that transcended politics and fear. The formal communication came from Admiral Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, of Earth Command. Dr. Marcus Chen, Lunar 7 Research Station. After review of recent events and consultation with the Colonial Council, Emergency Directive 847 is hereby suspended pending comprehensive review. The dragons currently under your protection are granted temporary refugee status, with full hearings to be scheduled within 30 days. Marcus closed his eyes and felt 8 years of guilt finally begin to lift from his shoulders. Around the station, he sensed the dragons' relief and gratitude through their telepathic connection. "Peraxis," he said aloud, knowing the elder dragon would hear him. "It looks like you and your people can stay as long as you need." "Human Marcus Chen," came the reply, warm with affection and respect. "We owe you a debt that cannot easily be repaid. But perhaps this is not an ending, but a beginning. Your people have seen what we truly are, and some among them are beginning to remember that fear need not define relationships between species." Through the observation port, Marcus watched Senna performing lazy loops around the station's solar arrays, her youthful exuberance finally restored. The sight filled him with something he hadn't felt in years, hope for a future where humans and dragons might stand together again. The 10 refugees had found their sanctuary, but more than that, they had reminded both species that cooperation was possible. The universe was vast enough for many different kinds of intelligence, and perhaps wise enough to give them all a second chance. Marcus Chen had spent 8 years in solitude, but his isolation was over. The real work, building bridges between worlds and species, was just beginning.